UN documents on the question of Palestine, featuring over 36,000 documents. The website also contains all information on the committee's activities. I invite you to visit the website at www.un.org/UNISPAL and to self-subscribe to our mailing list, which will keep you informed on our activities and how to participate in them. The committee's social media presence include Twitter at UNISPAL, the Facebook page of the committee at UN.Palestinian Rights, Instagram, and its YouTube channel. I invite you to follow us on Twitter as well. During the COVID-19 pandemic's restrictions, the committee implemented its 2021 program of work, convening virtual conferences and meetings where the use of social media helped to reach target audiences across the globe. Our high-profile virtual events discussed crucial issues on the mobilization of donor support for UNRWA, on the question of Jerusalem, on working with strategic partners such as parliamentarians and civil society organizations. All these activities were broadcast live on UN TV and social media, attracting a significant number of viewers. The Bureau also disseminated its quarterly statements to the Security Council in different languages. We issued critical public statements on the May 2021 conflict in Gaza, the situation in East Jerusalem, the ongoing expansion of settlements, and the recent designation by Israel of 6 Palestinian humanitarian and human rights CSOs as terrorist groups. The committee's secretariat, the Division for Palestinian Rights, prepared several periodic publications, including quarterly newsletters, a monthly bulletin, and a weekly NGO action news. The division also prepared and disseminated annual compilations of all UN resolutions and reports issued by all UN entities on the question of Palestine. In addition, the division printed as booklets and e-book reproduction of the highly acclaimed UN exhibits from 2017 to 2020, and I invite you to view the booklets in electronic format on the webpage of the committee. The division is constantly developing and improving its social media skills and cooperates very closely with the organizers of this seminar. The monthly monitoring of the number of visits to the committee website, our Twitter account impressions, and the number of subscribers to our mailing list show a steady increase in figures, pointing to the growing public interest on the question of Palestine and on the information provided by the committee. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, let me tell you that I see much scope for complementarity and cooperation between the committee and the media, including you, to develop materials on the question of Palestine for dissemination and to maximize our collective impact. The committee will remain a reliable partner in the pursuit of the full realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including self-determination and independence. I look forward to greater collaboration and cooperation with the media in this endeavor and wish the seminar all success. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Niang. I think it was, eye-opening what you cited about this website being the world's largest online repository. I'm going to ask my colleagues to put in the chat the link to that website, as well as all the social media handles that you cited, because indeed, I think as we'll probably hear from our panelists, we need more than ever trusted information that is based on facts. And there are a number of narratives out there that are not helpful. So thank you very much for citing all of those and for your excellent statement. Ladies and gentlemen, 30 years have passed since the Madrid Peace Conference. 30 years have also passed since the first UN media seminar was held in 1991 in Helsinki. So while we realize that having the same status quo after all these years is dispiriting, we can neither lose hope nor stop trying. We will continue our efforts to enhance dialogue and understanding and promote a peaceful settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this year, we've assembled an impressive list of renowned speakers to discuss two important and stimulating themes. The first is the 30th anniversary of Madrid Peace Conference. Can hope prevail? It will take place immediately after the opening session, and I will have the honor to moderate it. And tomorrow, on Wednesday, the 17th of November at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will have another really engaging panel. I am sure the discussion is around solutions journalism in the coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict. We look forward to your engagement on social media. Kindly use the seminar's hashtag UN Media Seminar. If you use this across your social media platforms, we can follow it and see what kind of questions you're asking, and you can be engaged in the conversation this week. Again, that hashtag is UN Media Seminar. So this concludes the opening segment, and we can move now to our first panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, this month marks the 30th anniversary of the Madrid Peace Conference, which was held in 1991. It is considered to be one of the most important peace initiatives to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Unfortunately, the accomplishments of the Madrid Conference fell short of, quote, putting an end, unquote, to the conflict, as the late US President George H.W. Bush had hoped at the time. So how can we assess the Madrid Conference today? Is the two-state solution still viable? How can we achieve a peaceful settlement? Our esteemed panelists will try to answer these questions and more in our first panel discussion, titled, again, the 30th anniversary of the Madrid Peace Conference, Can Hope Prevail? Let me now introduce them to you. First, we're very happy to have with us today from Tel Aviv, His Excellency Dr. Yossi Beilin. Dr. Beilin has held many ministerial positions in the Israeli government, including as Deputy Foreign Minister, Deputy Finance Minister, Minister of Economy and Planning, Minister in the Office of Prime Minister, Minister for Religious Affairs, Minister of Justice. Mr. Beilin has been a leading proponent of the peace process. In 2008, Dr. Beilin resigned from the Knesset after he had served there for 11 years, establishing the Beilin, a global consulting firm where he serves as president. He is also chairman of the steering committee of HL Education for Peace for the Geneva Initiative in Israel, and the chairman of the Hillel Students Organization in Israel. Very active man. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Dr. Beilin. It's also my pleasure to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Riyad Mansour. Dr. Mansour is ambassador and permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations. In addition, he is the State of Palestine's non-resident ambassador to Costa Rica, as well as to the Dominican Republic. Ambassador Mansour has also lectured as an adjunct professor in the Political Science Department of the University of Central Florida. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ambassador Mansour. And I'm also happy to introduce Dr. Grace Wermenbol. Dr. Wermenbol is a non-resident scholar at the Washington-based Middle East Institute. She has previously served as lecturer on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at the University of Oxford. She received her PhD and MA from the University of Oxford, St. Anthony's College, where her work focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. She is author of A Tale of Two Narratives, which she just told us just came out a few months ago, so hot off the press. A Tale of Two Narratives, it's called, which examines the perpetuation of conflict narratives in Israeli and Palestinian societies in the post-Oslo era. It's published by Cambridge University Press. Good to have you, Dr. Wermenbol, and let me start asking a question to all of you. 20 years ago, the late US Secretary of State Colin Powell said on the 10th anniversary of the Madrid Conference, quote, "It's a time to look forward as well as a time to look back. We are looking forward now as we try to capture the spirit of Madrid and create a renewed sense of hope and common purpose for the peoples of the Middle East. It is now 2021, and the world has not succeeded in capturing the spirit of Madrid. Why is that, and what are the main obstacles?" Each of you have about 5 minutes to respond. And let me start with Dr. Beilin. You have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed. The Madrid conference was a very important milestone because everybody was there. And that was a kind of a miracle because beforehand, in the years of 84 to 2000 or to 1990, the major conflict, the major dispute between the rotating prime ministers, Peres from the Labour Party and Shamir from the Likud, was the issue of an international conference. And why was it? Because the Arab leaders, and especially King Hussein, were not ready to negotiate peace with Israel in a context which was not an international conference. That did not want to repeat the bilateral experiment of President Sadat of Egypt. So they said, okay, let us have a conference with all the relevant Arab countries and other countries, and this will be conducive to bilateral talks and to between Israel and the Palestinians, the Jordanians, the Lebanese, and the Syrians. Now, Shamir was very much, Peres was for it, Shamir was very much against it, because I think that he, generally speaking, did not want to get to a point of the partition of the land. That was the bottom line, even if he did not say so. But he did not want to have a conference, and the claim was that the whole world will be against Israel, so how can we won't have any allies. Now, what happened is that after the government fell, and Shamir became the prime minister only of the right-wing parties of Israel, and that happened in 90, he went to an international conference. This was the surprise. And in that international conference, with all the difficulties, the Palestinians took part, the Jordanians, the Syrians, and the Lebanese. And that was a real milestone, because this was conducive to other efforts like the Oslo process in 93 and the peace between Israel and Jordan in 94. So we cannot say that it is the same status quo. The situation was there already better, and it was part of the end of the Cold War, for sure. It had to do with the Cold War, it had to do with the first Gulf War, and the support of the PLO in Saddam Hussein, and the attitude of the Arab countries against the PLO, the feeling of Arafat that he was cornered, and then he was perhaps ready to take steps which otherwise he wouldn't have taken. But the bottom line was that Israel and the Palestinians and the Jordanians and others were in the same room and negotiated, on the one hand, bilateral peace, on the other hand, multilateral talks on economy, on water, on refugees, and other issues, which was eventually the basis for the later Abraham Accords. So I believe that Madrid changed a lot. It was a result of a certain moment of history, but it built the basis for other important processes. Now, the fact that until today we don't have peace is very tragic, no question. But we are not in the same place. Rather than in 91 in Madrid, or even in 93 with Oslo, when we did not have a real roadmap for peace, we did not have on both sides, neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians, a real picture of how would we like to have the peace solution. we do have it now. I mean, the idea of a two-state solution, the vision of Jerusalem, the basis of 67 with mutual land swaps, all these things became kind of staples. I mean, you say it in the middle of your sleep. Two-state solution, 67, land swaps. This was not the case then. So I admit the development is too modest. This is not what we really wanted, those who believed in peace. But we are not in the same place. And there is room for hope, because for both peoples, peace on this basis is the only way to solve their problem. And I think that it is doable. My own idea is that if it is under an umbrella of a confederation of two independent and sovereign states, it will be easier to have this solution rather than just a two-state solution full stop. It is not a must, but it is a facilitator that people should take very seriously into account.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beilin. That was, and also really for that historic perspective. I think people are often thinking we've not come anywhere, and yet you have said that none of these two-state solutions, 67 land swaps, were even existed then. So modest, but you did give us some room for hope. And I think very important that we said is peace is the only way to solve the problem. So thank you very much for that perspective. We were going to go straight to Ambassador Mansour, but he's having some connection problems. We hope to bring him in a little bit later. But I wonder now if we could bring in Dr. Grace Wermenbol. How would you like to react and give us?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and the UN for inviting me once again to the International Media Conference on Peace in the Middle East. I'm very much honored to be part of this panel. I would like to use my opening remarks to also briefly reflect on the title of this panel, and particularly comment on the latter part, can hope prevail? So as you outlined in your opening statements, in October 1991, 30 years ago last month, the Madrid Peace Conference took place. And as Dr. Beilin also alluded to, the three-day conference represented a diplomatic breakthrough in relations between the State of Israel and the Arab world. So for the first time, as we heard, Israel engaged in direct face-to-face negotiations with its immediate neighbors, and beyond the multilateral negotiations on water, refugees, the conference also laid the foundations for an open and direct dialogue between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So the Madrid's conference principal success, in my view, lay in the fact that it created a framework for future bilateral and multilateral peace negotiations, both between Israel and the Palestinians, culminating in the 1993-1994 Oslo Accords, and between Israel and its Arab neighbors, the effects of which continue until this very day. Nevertheless, focusing on the latter part of the title of this conference, Can Hope Prevail? It is evident that neither the Madrid conference nor ensuing peace negotiations to date have been able to provide a sustainable and fair resolution to the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The perpetuation and expansion of Israeli settlements, including during times of peace negotiations in the 90s, have eroded any ability to maintain a status quo in which to faithfully broker an equitable solution that takes into account both Israelis and Palestinians' national demands. And I also add that the current political landscape in Israel and Palestine leaves little hope for any near-term peace agreement. There's an ongoing intra-Palestinian civil war. continuous postponement of elections by the PA, which have hampered the possibility of any effective mediation and which enable Israel and its allies to invoke the no partner for peace narrative to justify the absence of mediation. And in Israel in 2020, the emergence of a broad cross-party anti-Netanyahu government has effectively also precluded any chance for effective peace negotiations. As we've seen, Prime Minister Bennett has rejected any peace process in the near future and instead has come out in favor of a so-called shrinking of the conflict. At the same time, and I will finish with this thought, it is clear that Israel no longer feels that it needs to make progress on the Palestinian track and engage in any compromises in order to normalize relations with Arab and Muslim majority countries, as has become evident with last year's Abraham Accords. So 30 years on from the Madrid Conference, Israel's position in the world has become increasingly normalized without resolving the hardest final status issues and achieving a sustainable peace accord that formed the very premise of the 1991 conference. And I'll end there for now.
Thank you very much, Grace. A little less hopeful, your comments. I think that's a great segue to Ambassador Mansour, who has now joined us. Can you connect with us, Ambassador Mansour? We'd love to hear from you on your reaction to the Madrid conference. Where do we stand? Has it succeeded? What are the main obstacles? Ambassador Mansour. Let's see, I was told that he was able to connect. Would very much like to hear from them. Colleagues and technical colleagues, can you let me know via WhatsApp what's happening? He dropped off again. They're working on it. Okay. And I see somebody there. Okay, so I think we'll just, in the meantime, continue the discussion. And I'd like to see if Dr. Beilin would like to react to what Grace Wermenbol just said.
Well, there is for sure room to be pessimistic. You have on the Israeli side, a very strange government, better than the previous one. I see that Riyad joined us. I don't want to lose him again, so maybe now.
Okay, Riyad Mansour, Ambassador Mansour, are you there? Oh, I just got a little message. He dropped off again. He's probably, there he is. We just need you to unmute, Ambassador Mansour.
Unmute.
There you are. Excellent. Yes, we can hear you, we can see you, and we welcome you very much.
I don't see you, so that's my situation. I need to make sure that I can charge this device because it's about to die while we are talking. Let's see.
Very good. Well, let me just introduce Dr. Mansour again. He's the ambassador and permanent observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, and as well as non-resident ambassador to Costa Rica and Dominican Republic. He has also lectured as an adjunct professor in the political science department of the University of Central Florida. And while he's connecting, just to remind of the discussion that we are having, the initial discussion is asking you to let us know how you think. It's 2021, 30 years after the Madrid conference. Have we succeeded in capturing the spirit of Madrid? Have we not? Why is that? And what are the main obstacles? So over to you, Ambassador Mansour.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank you and your department and the special unit in Palestine in the Department of Global Communication, the UN, the Secretary General, which I assume that somebody read a statement on his behalf or it was pre-recorded, and my colleague, Ambassador Niang, the chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, your other panelists, and those who are following us for organizing this very important meeting. Let me begin by saying it is an honor for me to join you in this annual seminar on Palestine. We come together on this 30th anniversary of the Madrid Conference to reflect on what has passed, but also to look ahead, seeking hope and responsible action for a just peace that will enable the Palestinian people to realize their inalienable rights, including to live in freedom and dignity in their homeland. For us, we would have preferred to have this meeting in person in Madrid, as the government of Spain was willing and ready to do it, but unfortunately it did not take place there for reasons related to the safety measures that the UN put in place. But be that as it may, distinguished colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. In many meetings here at the UN, I hear some friends call on the parties to resume negotiations or emphasize that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be resolved only through negotiations. We can agree with these calls as long as they are not meant to detach the negotiation process from the rules of international law that are fundamental for any solution to be just or meant to be a substitute to the role of the international community in upholding its own obligations and ensuring that the parties observe theirs as a requirement for meaningful and successful negotiations. Let us take the situation as it stands today. We have an Israeli government that says only that it is open to the two-state solution, that it is not ready to engage in final status negotiation, and its positions on final status issues like the ones of its predecessor are explicitly not conducive to peace. Let us take them one by one. Borders. Israel insists that it will retain control over all borders and will be the sole sovereign from the river to the sea, actively pursuing policies and practices that negate the 1967 borders and rejecting the prospects of a sovereign and independent Palestinian state. Jerusalem. Israel insists that it will maintain its illegal annexation of East Jerusalem under its claim that Jerusalem is the eternal and indivisible capital of Israel, quote unquote, and persists with all illegal measures aimed at altering the city's demography, character, identity, and legal status. Settlements. Israel has absolutely no intention to dismantle its settlements and has announced plans to construct thousands of additional units in grave breach of international law. Refugees. Israel insists that they have no right of return whatsoever, and Israel claims that it bears no responsibility for their fate, past, present, or future, ignoring history, UN resolutions, and the universal principles of justice and equity. Water. Israel insists that it is the only sovereign, maintains full control over our land and resources, including a vital part of the Palestinian state and our reservoir, the Jordan Valley, which constitute 30% of the West Bank. Of course, I don't want to refer to the thousands of prisoners who are in Israeli jail and in which their continuous being detained in Israeli jails will not lead to peace between us and the Israelis. And in this connection, since the occupation, about 1 million Palestinians have been detained or imprisoned over the years. A large number of them are children, women, and many of them died in prison. Some babies were delivered in prison as well. Under such conditions, calling for resumption of bilateral negotiations or saying that international peace initiatives will be taken only when the parties are ready ignores the asymmetry of power and the ability of Israel to dictate its will on the ground. This means de facto allowing Israel to obstruct any credible political process while proceeding with its unlawful annexation of Palestinian land, destruction of the two-state solution, and denial of Palestinian rights in parallel. It is not realpolitik, it's abandonment, resignation to a reality that can only lead to escalation, discrimination, violence, and instability, as we painfully saw this past May. It is allowing colonialism and apartheid to be entrenched. It is avoiding to spend some political capital now, only to have to spend much more of it with potentially more risk and less results a few years down the road. These conditions look familiar because they resemble the ones we were faced with in 1991. The Shamir government was unequivocal in its rejection of Palestinian rights and peace. Many said then that the Madrid Conference would be a photo op and that it would not lead to any fundamental change. But the reality is that the international community's will was stronger than Israel's colonial will. Shamir had to attend the Madrid Conference. Literally, he was dragged into the conference. He did not go there willingly. He had no choice but to attend a conference convened to achieve the very purpose he was aiming to prevent. And the PLO was not happy about many of the arrangements, notably that it was not formally represented at the conference, and yet it was ready to participate. International actors came together to generate momentum at the very time where parties seemed further apart than ever. That momentum translated into the Israeli elections and in the Palestinian decision-making process, leading to bilateral negotiations. And Yossi Beilin lived that period of time, and he knows the intricate details of the conditions that prevailed after the Madrid Conference. That led to, among other things, the Oslo agreements. 30 years after the Madrid Conference, we need such renewed international engagement to generate momentum, ensure the parties negotiate in good faith under international auspices and on the basis of the internationally recognized terms of reference. That is the essence of the repeated call by President Abbas for an international peace conference and for our support to the proposal to convene the quartet at ministerial level. And in this connection, I want personally to thank the Secretary General for his unrelenting effort in this connection to revive the quartet and to have a meeting to begin with at the ministerial level. Look at it this way. What incentives does Israel have to end its occupation? And what disincentive does it face if it decides to persist with its colonial enterprise? The international community has an obligation to uphold its own vision. The resolutions of the Security Council, including 2334, the UN Charter, and international law. It could do so by devising a package of incentives and disincentives to ensure that the parties move in the right direction, not the opposite way. That does not require the consent of the parties or waiting for the results of negotiations between them. It requires political will. The alternative to peace based on the two-state solution on the 1967 borders would be too dire to allow it to happen under our eyes, while repeating strong and much needed positions, but failing to translate them into action. The quartet, as the body mandated by the Security Council, along with the Security Council itself and all states, have a role to play to allow for the resumption of meaningful negotiations under international auspices to achieve a peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine for the benefit of the Palestinian and Israeli peoples, the region, and the world. We know what needs to be done. We need the courage and foresight and will to do it, and this 30th anniversary should be the catalyst for serious and responsible action to that end. And I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share these thoughts with you in this very important occasion as we remember the 30th anniversary of the convening of that important conference in Madrid 30 years ago. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mansour, for that also historical perspective, but also bringing us to the current situation from your perspective, and also what is needed to reignite and renew international engagement and dialogue. And I think in a way you already answered the second question. So I will ask you to comment after the two other speakers have come in, but I'm going to move to the two other speakers because the second was really to look at, first of all, to quote the invitation that was issued 30 years ago. It was jointly issued by the United States and the Soviet Union to the Madrid Peace Conference, and it said, quote, "The United States and the Soviet Union believe that historic opportunity exists to advance the prospects for genuine peace throughout the region," unquote. So again, we have 30 years later. We've just heard a lot about where we are now, some more hopeful than others. Is it possible for the international community to create another historic opportunity to resolve the Israeli and Palestinian conflict? So I'm going to ask Dr. Beilin if you could address this question. Can we have another historic moment like Madrid to reset?
I'm afraid not. I don't see the world now taking the burden of convening such a conference. If you remember, Secretary Baker had a shuttle policy and shuttled between the Palestinians and the Israelis 8 times before the convening of the conference. I don't see an American effort today like that. I know President Biden very well, and I know that he's knowledgeable and that his heart is in the right place, meaning that he believes like the Ambassador Mansour and myself in peace in the Middle East, and the parameters are known. He doesn't have other parameters, but he is not in a situation to invest now in something which I believe most of his advisors, if not all of them, are telling him, don't touch it. All those who tried it in the past were burned. And I think that if we in the region, those who believe in peace and understand that it is in the interest of both sides, if we do not move, as we moved in Oslo, it was not suggested by the Americans or the Russians or whoever. The Americans did not know about Oslo until the end, until after signing the initial agreement in August 93. And we came to Secretary Christopher and to President Clinton to tell him about Oslo, and they were very happy, but they were not part of it. And they were not also part of the negotiations between Israel and Jordan in 93, 94. I believe that they contributed a lot. Without the help of the Americans, it couldn't happen once we signed the agreements. But it is not that they were involved in our negotiations then. So I believe that if we just wait for the world to do the work for us, it will be very difficult. I don't see it. I know that the Palestinians who are now divided for the last 14 years between Hamas and Fatah, it is also a tragedy that Gaza is kidnapped by Hamas and actually the West Bank is under Fatah or the PLO. And that is a very difficult situation. On the Israeli side, the current prime minister, as you already said, is against the Palestinian state and even against talking to Abu Mazen, which is a huge mistake by him. But I think that we were able in the past, and not only in the past, to talk to each other, and that we should do it again and try to bring to the world our own ideas, because nobody else will do it for us. It is, I believe that for Dr. Mansour to think that there is a possibility to repeat the experience, the experiment of Madrid, with such an investment of the president, of the secretary of state, is a little bit too optimistic. And if they are not involved, I mean, you see what happened when France tried to have an international conference about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Between us, nobody hears us. It was a joke. It was a joke. Even though Secretary Kerry came to Paris to pay respect to the president of France. This will not work like that. You need now an American administration which says, well, we are not putting the domestic issues too high on the agenda. China is not the major problem. We are going to make peace in the Middle East, and you don't have such an administration, and I don't blame them. They owe us nothing. We are the ones who are paying the price every day. And it is an asymmetric price. The price that the Palestinians are paying is higher, for sure. But this is the price that both parties are paying for such a long while. Israel is going to lose the main raison d'etre for its existence, which is being a Jewish state, according to the UN Resolution 181. If to the west of the Jordan River, there is a majority of Palestinians under a minority of Jews, it is the end of the whole story. And the Palestinians need badly their right for self-determination, for independence, not to be under our rule, even if some of us believe that we are a benevolent occupier, but there is no benevolent occupation. And so if those who are in need are not moving together in order to find solutions for the problems and just repeat the speeches of yesterday, nothing will happen. Then there is no reason for optimism. If I'm optimistic, it's not because I believe that things will be better. This is not the definition of optimism for me. What I believe is that if we move, we can change a lot, as we did in the 90s. But it is up to us. And if we boycott each other and say that it is not the right time to talk to each other, to meet with each other, and both of us are right. We have good, believe me, we are having very good excuses and arguments. We can argue from morning to night. Who was mistaken when? And I hate to do that. I never do that. What I'm saying is look at ourselves today and ask ourselves whether we are in such a bad situation that we cannot move together after so many years in which we know each other, talk to each other, know the families of each other, visited each other's home, whether it is Ramallah or Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. We can't sit together and talk. We need to wait for the superpowers in their spare time to do something for us as a kind of a favor, no?
Thank you very much, Dr. Beilin, for that impassioned analysis. And yeah, you're saying don't wait for the superpowers. It's you who are paying the price. It's up to us, and no one else will do it. So I think I was going to go to Dr. Wermenbol, but I think it would be better to go straight to Ambassador Mansour to get his reaction. Dr. Beilin is saying, why don't we sit together and talk, solve it ourselves? No one else will. What do you think about that? You need to unmute, please, Ambassador Mansour.
The good news is I was able to finish my statement before my iPad went dead on me. The bad news is it went dead and I did not hear what was said after I finished my statement.
May I just summarize very briefly, because I think it would be very important if you reacted. I'm not going to do any of it justice to what Dr. Beilin has said, but basically, in summary, he said that he doesn't see a big international effort led by the United States, a repetition of Madrid, that we should not and cannot wait for the superpowers. And if we wait for the world to do the work for us, it will be very difficult. And he believes that in the past, and looking at an example like Oslo, where there was no American or Russian involvement, the two parties were able to talk to each other and bring the world into your own ideas, and again, saying that nobody else is going to do it for us. Perhaps it's the time to sit together and find the solutions. It's up to us, is what he said. So how would you react to that, Dr. Mansour?
Well, thank you for the summary, but I thought when I came in, I listened to something that he said, that the US administration can do something. And then he continued with saying that we should be talking to each other. But let me just say that the lesson of Madrid, that the parties were not in a position to talk to each other, but the international community played a very important role in getting us, or beginning a process that opened so many doors, including the door of the Oslo Agreement. That is a key lesson of the Madrid conference. Even the Oslo, it's true that it was not the United States or the Soviet Union or the Russians later after them that paved the way for the talks in Oslo. If it wasn't for an outstanding diplomats and creative thinkers from Norway that facilitated the talks that led to the agreement of Oslo, it would not have happened by itself. So therefore, these are important lessons. It's not I am saying that we should not talk and negotiate, we should. But any effort from the international community or countries, now the Russian Federation, President Putin, he keeps inviting President Abbas and the Prime Minister of Israel to come to Moscow to talk. President Abbas accepted on 3 occasions, but the different prime ministers of Israel refused. Even China today is entering into the same effort, by inviting the two leaders to come to Beijing to begin the talks. So what I am saying is that in terms of talks, when you have one party ready and willing, and another one like Bennett, who is saying, I don't want to see Abu Mazen, I don't want to negotiate with him, I don't want to talk to him, I don't believe in the two-state solution. We cannot negotiate with the Israeli government piecemeal, that Yossi Beilin is ready to talk, or maybe Lapid, although I don't know exactly what Lapid stands for. He talks from both sides of his mouth. We don't know who is ready and willing to talk peace with the Palestinian side. It is the Israeli side have it very conveniently. They do what they want, they expand settlements, they commit illegal activities, and there is no accountability from the international community, from the United States, from the superpower. Put yourself in the shoes of the Israeli leaders. There is nothing that would force them even to talk to us. That situation has to change. And I think it is the responsibility of the international community, which is telling us, if you listen, for example, to the debates in the Security Council, everyone is saying for the two parties to talk, including Ambassador Linda Greenfield in her last statement, said also that she wants the two parties to go and talk. So if the Security Council with its all might, with its power, which is saying for the parties to talk, it cannot create a will to invite, as in Madrid, the parties to come and usher the negotiation, whether in New York or in Geneva or any place that the Security Council and the quartet as part of it to do so. And let's see who would show up and who would not. You need facilitators in order to not to keep the two parties in their comfort zone. The Israeli side, they have it their way. They are annexing Jerusalem every day, bit by bit. They are taking our land every day, bit by bit. They are building and expanding settlements every day. There are no consequences. There are no accountability. Why should they change their behavior? For us, we scream we want peace. We ask the international community, act on your decisions, on your resolutions, on the basis of international law. And nobody is moving from the theoretical to the practical, meaning from the positions that we welcome from the international community, the resolutions that we play a party in legislating them and supported by overwhelming majority, but they are not being translated into action so that we can move in the direction of peace. In that kind of situation, it is not sufficient, as Yossi Beilin is saying now, let's talk to each other. Every other day, there are delegations that go to Ramallah, including from a party that Yossi Beilin used to be a leader, maybe Yossi Beilin himself. He can go and talk to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, but he is not the decision maker. Bennett and his government are the decision makers. They are refusing to negotiate anything. At best, they might talk about issues related to how to manage the occupation while continuing with their enterprises. That situation is unsustainable. And the danger for the Israeli side, if it continues that way, it is apartheid. Apartheid cannot be tolerated by anyone, including by Jews in all corners of the globe. And I think John Kerry, when he gave his speech, his famous interview on television, after the adoption of Resolution 2334, it was a speech trying to save Israel from itself. You cannot have majority Palestinian Arabs from the Jordan to the river controlled and ruled by the minority who are Jews. That is apartheid. The best formula for us and for them is to separate in two states independent and equal, not in size, but equal in terms of justice and equality, and to enter a new relationship that perhaps could open doors that are not open now and potentially could be open in the future. We need wise, courageous men in the leadership in Israel to decide to move in that direction, as Rabin did and his team, including Yossi Beilin. And we need President Biden, the international community, and others to try to get us into a situation where we can begin the process of talks and negotiation to lead to the implementation of the global consensus on the two-state solution. We need to separate in order to be able to survive with freedom and dignity, at least for us, the Palestinian side. The other side, they have their own state. We need to create that condition very soon, because it is not only good for us and the Israelis, it is good for humanity. It is good for global peace. So we need help. We cannot do it alone. We can scream as much as we can. We need help. We need help from those who have the power to give help. On top of the list, the United States, the Quartet, the Security Council, which compose the Europeans, the Russians, and others.
Thank you, Ambassador Mansour. So your view is we need help from the powers, and we just heard Dr. Beilin thinking, please don't wait for the superpowers. We need to do it ourselves. So I'd like to ask Dr.
Go and convince Bennett. Don't convince me. Go and convince Bennett.
I'd like to ask Dr. Grace Wermenbol of the Middle East Institute what she thinks of this, any reflections on what you just heard, and also you can answer the question that was raised about how you think we should go forward. Do we need another Madrid-like conference?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you to both of my panel members for their comments. As this kind of discussion started with, can we have another Madrid conference? The answer is, of course, yes, it is possible. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for a repeat of the same formula of the Madrid conference, given the fact that, we've all established that, peace has not been the outcome of that conference. I think, Dr. Beilin is right. The U.S. focus on the U.S. foreign policy focus and even domestic policy focus right now is not on solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it's important to remember that John Kerry is a part of the cabinet. I'm sure Biden, as vice president at that time, remembers the failed peace initiative that was put forward by John Kerry under Obama. I'm not sure I agree with the statement that the U.S. doesn't owe Israel-Palestine anything. Biden's foreign policy, at least the foreign policy that he's put forward and promoted, is one that is supposed to be based on human rights and a commitment to human rights abroad. And I believe that the U.S. has both the ability to apply the carrot and the stick, given its aid and security relationship with Israel, and also the fact that it remains the preferred interlocutor for Israel when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and mediation. Now, I have, I believe the Biden administration can take certain steps in the next few months that will aid in kind of establishing a relationship within the conflict as a future mediator that would make it a more equitable mediator and undo a lot of the policies that were put in place by the Trump administration. Those policies aren't necessarily going to put in place the framework for peace negotiations. And I agree with Dr. Beilin that, peace and the desire for peace does need to come from the two parties themselves. And unfortunately, polls suggest that neither the Israeli population or the Palestinian population has a lot of hope for peace happening in the near term. That doesn't mean they don't hope that peace happens in the near term, but they don't believe that the parameters are in place for peace to happen in the near term. So what can the Biden administration do to establish itself as a more equitable mediator, particularly when it comes to the comparison with the last administration led by Donald Trump? One of the things that Biden has said, his administration has said, is that they are going to return a Palestinian consulate to Jerusalem. That requires the agreement of the host nation. Israel has already said that they do not want a Palestinian consulate to be reopened in Jerusalem. But that is something that I believe the Biden administration can push for with the Israelis. I think it's an important step, even though, as we've established, Israel does view Jerusalem as its undivided capital. I think that's an important step to establish itself as a more equitable mediator going forward. The other thing is the Trump administration closed the Palestinian mission in DC and put in place legislation that would make it very hard to be opened again in the future. Now, again, it is important if you want to be an equitable mediator to have that Palestinian mission be able to be represented in Washington, D.C. Now, a third thing that the Biden administration can do is with regard to settlements. The U.S. in the past has referred to settlements as obstacles towards peace. The Trump administration took a different view on that and didn't say that they weren't necessarily illegal under international law. In recent months, we've seen that as Israel has tried to expand and build new settlements, that the Biden administration rather has come out and condoned it, but it has never come out and said that settlements are illegal as they are under international law. Another thing pertaining to settlements is that the Trump administration put in place the ability for funding, taxpayer funding, U.S. taxpayer funding, to be used for research in settlements in the West Bank. That is, again, something that could be undone by the Biden administration. So at the end of the day, these kind of steps and policies that I mentioned aren't necessarily going to lead to peace, but I do think they're important steps that the Biden administration can take to establish itself as a more equitable mediator going forward and establish the parameters that when the domestic and foreign policy issues that we currently see as taking kind of a precedent subside, that the Biden administration can work with the Europeans to perhaps engage and take the lead on more equitable mediations going forward.
Thanks, Grace. I think that introduced another aspect, also the credibility of those who are the mediators, and a kind of also perhaps step-by-step approach. So maybe I bring in, I think, a related comment from somebody who is watching on Twitter at Dr._Fatah_Arafi. He writes, peace has varying degrees and levels, and from your point of view, what is the maximum degree it can reach in the Middle East within 2 years, for example? And what are your plans to promote peace in the region? So I think the question is are there any degrees of peace that can be acceptable, or is it all or nothing? Perhaps, would you like, since you're still there, Grace, do you want to maybe address that? And then we can move to the other.
I'm a big proponent of peace in the Middle East. I'm a proponent of the two-state solution. I'm a proponent of the idea that where there's a will, there's a way. But I believe, given kind of the specific geopolitical issues and priorities that I've outlined with regard with the US, but also internally inside Israel and in the Palestinian territories, that it would be quite unlikely for peace to happen within the next 2 years. That doesn't mean that I don't hope it does happen. I'm not quite sure I would see peace, and what I define with peace is a resolution to the final status solution that didn't happen during the Oslo Accords. So a two-state solution where both parties' national demands are met or compromised on to a certain extent, that there's a two-state solution, and both parties feel that those compromises reflect national demands, at least to a certain extent. I'm not sure I see that, but I remain hopeful. I remain hopeful that the U.S. puts Israel-Palestine as a foreign policy priority again. I'm certainly a proponent of that in my work, but in terms of the reality that we're dealing with, I'm not quite sure we would see an independent Palestinian state. And next to we already have an independent Israeli state. I'm not sure we would see that in the next 2 years, unfortunately.
Okay, so we have to be realists, but still retain vision and hope. So I'd like to ask
Melissa.
Dr. Mansour, and then we'll let Dr. Beilin come in because he's been sidelined for a few minutes. Yeah.
I agree with Grace with regard to the points that the Biden administration promised during the campaign and tried to begin implementing them during the last 9 months since they took over the office. Of course, for a political process to open additional doors that could lead to peace negotiation and to agreements, the example of the Madrid conference taught us, if it was not for Madrid, Oslo most likely would not have happened. So it is not Madrid that led to the Oslo agreement, but without it, Oslo would not have possibly happened. So what I'm saying is that if the Biden administration to begin implementing, especially the political aspects of what they promised, such as the opening of the American consulate in East Jerusalem, because it is so symbolic and significant of not accepting the annexation of Jerusalem, but to eventually have the capital of the State of Palestine in East Jerusalem and the capital of Israel in the other side. You have to keep the hope alive of reaching peace. It might be very realistic not to have the independence of the State of Palestine in 2 years, although I will be thrilled if a miracle to happen and for that to be the case. But if we are on the right track of moving into some political steps, including, as the Secretary General told me, the significance of meeting of the quartet at the ministerial level by sending a signal to the Israeli side that the international community, the Security Council, the quartet, meaning the US, Russia, Europe, and the United Nations, do want to begin the initial stages of opening doors for peace. So all the things that the US administration, the Biden administration, promised, including in the file of against annexation and against settlement and against any unilateral action that will affect the two-state solution in a negative way. These are the words of the Biden administration. It is our job to try to see the implementation of these small steps to keep the hope alive and to begin with some steps that would lead to beginning of negotiation and hopefully to lead to bigger things down the road. But if we say nothing that can be done and the Biden administration should not be engaged, we should not engage with it in terms of fulfilling the promises that they made during the campaign and after the campaign, then in reality, we are even giving a freer hand of the government of Prime Minister Bennett not to do anything except the illegal negative things that they are engaged in. So I totally agree with Grace, and it is our collective responsibility to move, to implement every small step in that direction. Helping UNRWA was great. The United States to go back to defend UNRWA as an important agency that looks after the refugees and for stabilizing the Middle East, it is a significant step in the right direction, but it's not sufficient. We need more, and let's continue on that path. If they open the consulate in East Jerusalem soon, and the longer they delay it, the bigger the political price will be. It would be an important step in the right direction. These are the kind of things, realistically speaking, that we should be talking about at this stage, including the convening of a ministerial meeting of the quartet.
Thank you, Ambassador Mansour. A number of small steps that could put together make a difference. Thank you for outlining those. I have a question for Dr. Beilin. In 2003, you and Mr. Yasser Abed Rabo, among others, drafted the Geneva Initiative, also known as the Geneva Accord, which was a draft permanent status agreement to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Do you think that a comprehensive agreement of that nature is still feasible now, and why? I know you've addressed this a bit, but not specifically around that initiative. Maybe you could give us a little bit of context on what you were trying to achieve there and what happened and whether that could be a potential format.
Unmute.
Thank you. Mr. Abed Rabo and myself were negotiating in Taba in 2001, January 2001. And both of us felt that we were very close to agreements. I mean, it was already a few weeks after the Clinton parameters, which regretfully were rejected by Arafat. Not upfront, but in a way, President Clinton himself said to me, he rejected. And accepted by us, by our very dovish government, if you remember, of the day. And on this basis, which were quite close to the 67 borders, to the division of Jerusalem, and other things, a solution for the refugees in 5 ways and whatever, we were feeling that we needed just some more time in order to find a deal. But the world used to tell us that the devil is in the details. That when we really sit together and ask ourselves, how do we divide Jerusalem? Where exactly is going to be the border? And what is the solution for the refugees, knowing that the right of return as is will not be implemented? But you can find other solutions like the Clinton parameters. Symbolic number, a compensation, absorption of a part of the refugees in other countries in the world, and so on and so forth. So we decided to sit together, to gather a group of people on the Israeli side and of the Palestinian side. Most of them were former negotiators. It was not exactly grassroots initiative, but it was an informal one and not an official one. And we negotiated for 2.5 years for a permanent agreement. And afterwards, for 2 years, we worked on 500 very boring pages of annexes on water, of you name it, everything. You can just take it and implement it tomorrow almost, if you wish. And if you ask me whether something like this can be repeated, you know, Prime Minister Sharon said in an interview in the New York Times in 2004, in April, that he decided to withdraw from Gaza because of the Geneva Initiative, since he saw how popular it was. And this is what I need. I mean, the initiative itself was offered to the world in the worst moment, much worse than today. It was in the midst of the Intifada. People were killed daily on both sides, in dozens. It was crazy to issue it then. It was not in a feeling that, okay, we will publish the agreement and our leaderships will applaud us. No, it is the other, I mean, Sharon called us traitors. And nevertheless, the civil society is powerful. And when he saw that so many people supported it, even without reading it, because people want peace. I mean, most of them want peace among the Palestinians and among the Israelis. And they are not used to read books. So I believe that whatever kind of peace we are coming with in the future, not on the level of Bennett, I'm not going to convince Bennett on anything. On the level of those who believe in peace on both sides, you have quite strong and important peace camps on both sides, which are ready to compromise. They understand that making peace means compromises. And they know more or less what and where they should compromise. It will not surprise them. And this is why when I'm talking about Israelis and Palestinians, I'm not talking about necessarily Bennett and Abu Mazen. I'm talking about people like us. We can have an impact on them. And I think that we are not always understanding the power that we have as civil societies. Maybe it is more difficult on the Palestinian side. There is a big wave of anti-normalization there, and anybody who is talking to us is already in danger. It is not simple, and I don't belittle it. It is easier perhaps on Israel, not that we are getting compliments, but at least we can do that. We can negotiate, we can go to Ramallah, as Ambassador Mansour said, and we can, and some of them can also come to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, and we talk to each other. What I'm afraid of, it is not that I'm against, I mean, the consulate and whatever, I'm talking about it with whoever I can in the United States, in other places. And it is not that we are having an argument about it. We are on the same page with the foolish decisions of Trump, which were really destructive. But I warn ourselves of red herrings. And in a way, the consulate and some of the other confidence building measures are playing into those who want to manage the conflict. God forbid. God forbid. And when there is a consulate which had been there and will be there, by the way, I'm sure that it will return some this way or another. But once there is a consulate there, it will be such a big deal that people may forget about the real things. So, of course, I'm not suggesting to give up on it. And I personally will not give up on it. But these are not the big things. This is not an alternative. It's not that if we can't make peace now, we should go for the red herrings. No. I think that we should do whatever we can in order to achieve a permanent agreement between us. Now we know what is this agreement. And if we were courageous enough, there is a chance. We should not give up on it.
I think you could convince most people, Dr. Beilin. I wonder if you're able to, what is it like when you speak? Just give us a sense of your activity. You're talking to us from Tel Aviv. Does your hope and your calls to action, are you getting much support for them, or what is the situation like?
You know, I saw today a public opinion poll, which was done in Palestine by Dr. Shikaki, who is the most important pollster in Palestine. And there is an increase of 10% of in the support for a two-state solution, from 36 to 46. It's not enough. We need the majority, not a plurality. But there is a plurality in Israel, and there is a plurality in Palestine, and it is true that after Geneva, after Oslo, there was a majority for that. But there is no competition to it. I mean, you hear many people, even in the States, are saying, okay, forget about the two-state solution. Let us have a one-state solution and the rights and not political rights. I mean, in my view, it is really nonsense. It's nonsense. The solution of the two-state solution, which has been there in the earth since the Peel Commission of 1937, that was the first time in which it was raised, is the only reasonable solution. So I may suggest that it will be under the umbrella of a confederation. Maybe people will reject it. Maybe people will like it. I also believe that the idea of a confederation, which it's a group of Palestinians and Israelis, which will very soon go out with it and publish it, make it public. I mean, it is another book, but less boring about the features of the confederation. What does it really mean? Because as you know, there is no confederation in the world. The only one which resembles a confederation is the EU. But you don't have a confederation in the world. I mean, those who call themselves confederations like Switzerland or Canada are not confederations, but federations. But so we have to invent the wheel, but I think that we can really suggest something interesting. So even those who are bored by the idea of a two-state may say, okay, if it is wrapped by this confederation, which may be very fruitful for both sides, this is more realistic than other things. And I think that we have to really reinvent ourselves every day and talk to each other, not only on the level of leadership. The leaderships have to listen to the people.
I wonder if Ambassador Mansour could react to that.
Well, yeah, Melissa, I know that I've known, Yossi Beilin for a long period of time, and I've been with him on panels so many times, and I'm proud of the fact that I play a role always in suggesting him and people like him to be invited to panels and to express their views. Of course, he referred to so many ideas. Some of them would take a long time to deal with, but I don't think that there is a useful purpose of trying to blame one party or the other, particularly from our side of historical experiences in the past, including, the Clinton parameters. I was watching, like many of you, narratives of senior US officials recently who had different opinions about this idea in the past, but now they are saying that there was nothing, offered to Yasser Arafat. But I don't think that will serve any purpose at this time. But I wish that people like Yossi Beilin to be in the majority in Israel, as you asked, Melissa. Unfortunately, the peace camp, the organized peace camp in Israel, is not as it used to be when Yossi Beilin and others like him in the 90s, 20, 25 years ago, were very influential in Israel. And in fact, they were in the government. The period that he referred to, Sharon won the election, and the rightists in Israel had a stronger hands from that time moving forward. Peace, it's true that civil society organizations engage with each other and they push good ideas, and we support that, and I think it is useful. But at the end of the day, those who negotiated in Oslo, there were ministers like Yossi Beilin. He was the justice minister, and it was then the foreign minister, the deputy prime minister, Shimon Peres, and others, and from our side, officials. Those who were invited, to Madrid were officials. Those are the ones who can make the decisions. When Secretary of State Baker played a very important role with his Soviet counterpart in extending invitation to Shamir and to all other parties. They were officials. They were able, to implement their desires. I know civil society play a very important role in moving things in the right direction, especially if they are powerful, not curtailed and restricted and dwindling in number as in Israel. That you talk about B'Tselem and Peace Now, a few of them who are really doing a remarkable job, and we appreciate what they're doing and we engage them all the time, and individuals like Yossi Beilin, but the number is going down, it's not going up. And I'd love really to see Yossi Beilin and people like him, although the party that he belonged to, always they hover around 4 to 5 representatives in the Knesset. So the left with the Arab list, of Ayman Aoudeh and Yossi Beilin, not Yossi Beilin, B'Tselem, are the minority to the center left and to the left in the Israeli Knesset. And it's not what it used to be during Yossi Beilin, when significant number of the Knesset were from the center and the center left. This is the reality of the day today, which makes things more complicated. But nevertheless, I agree, we will never give up. I will never give up. If I don't think that what we are doing at the United Nations is not meaningful to the cause of peace and to the cause of the Palestinian people, I will not be there. I see that there is massive support, and we appreciate that, because there is a sense of justice that is so strong at the United Nations by the great majority of nations. And we're grateful for that. And it gives us strength, and it gives us the resiliency to continue our struggle along the steadfastness of our people on the ground and the land of the State of Palestine. And hopefully, one of these days, we will begin a meaningful process that would lead to the end of the occupation and to having 2 states living side by side in peace and security. International law tells us the borders are the 4th of June of 1967. But we also know that if we reach the moment of meaningful negotiation, genuine one, then we can negotiate the adjustment. It's not our invention. Many countries throughout the world, they adjusted their borders. In the case of Poland, 3-4 times in a span of 100 years. So, but if we agree on certain things of benefit for the 2 people in their own independent state, then everything possible. We are not there yet. We are not taking the initial steps in that direction. Let us begin by the first step in that direction. And there are many first steps that can be taken. And I think that would help us to move in the right direction, not to continue entrenching the negative atmosphere that is an excellent environment for extremism in both sides. And of course, the one that is controlling the other one, the extremism in that side and the side of the occupying power is much more devastating than the other side, although extremism in both sides should not be encouraged. But what should be encouraged are those who are advocating to move in the direction of peace, end of occupation, 2-state solution, and then opening harmony and relationship of a different nature that I thought during my time Yossi Beilin, we will see it. We might not, but we have to make sure that our children will enjoy such possibilities in the near future. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ambassador Mansour. I think that we're hearing both of you say, you and Dr. Beilin say, you'll never give up, and wanting a 2-state solution. Dr. Grace Wermenbol has written a book called A Tale of Two Narratives. She works for also a think tank that is designed to advance the agenda of peace, especially, I think, in in relation, her work to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'd like, Grace, if you could just come in now, having written this book, A Tale of Two Narratives, and maybe give us a bit of insight into what the book is all about. Why is it titled A Tale of Two Narratives? And are you hearing two narratives after spending this more than an hour at the seminar today?
I don't think Yossi Beilin is presenting the other narrative. He's closer to my narrative. But
it sounds very close. Yes.
Thank you. I'm happy. I'll take a second in a minute to talk about my book. If I could just briefly comment on what Dr. Beilin and Ambassador Mansour said in this, looking at the environment in which we are currently functioning and NGOs are currently operating. I think, with the recent designation, Israeli designation of 6 Palestinian NGOs as terrorists, I think it is clear that both actually for Palestinian NGOs, but also for Israeli NGOs, that the environment has become increasingly difficult in which to operate as a pro-peace organization. In 2016, the Israeli government put forward and passed a law that made it increasingly hard for Israeli NGOs to get funding from foreign governments, and put in place requirements for them to be transparent about that, effectively targeting pro-peace organizations. Also briefly on the 1 versus 2 state solution. The 1 state solution, it's true, it appears to be increasingly in vogue in the international community. In my view, it's never been a realistic resolution to the Israeli peace conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Jewish state is premised on the fact that there's a majority that is Jewish. I also think, the passing of the nation state law inside Israel, the ongoing socioeconomic and political discriminations that Palestinians face inside Israel, inside the 1948 borders, that doesn't suggest to me that a 1-state solution would be an equitable or create an equitable society for all its citizens if it were to be put in place, both Israeli Jews and Palestinians. Then briefly on my book, A Tale of Two Narratives, my book examines the perpetuation of conflict narratives in Israeli Jewish and Palestinian societies after the Oslo Accord. So it examines to what extent school books, mass media have presented the conflict narratives on both sides. And it certainly is two narratives that have been presented and that continue to be contextualized, historical narratives that continue to be contextualized in both societies in line with kind of national demands and understandings of the conflict. The conversation today is not necessarily reflective of those narratives in the book, but it is true that, speaking of the Clinton parameters, there's definitely different interpretations that I've heard today in terms of who's to blame for negotiations shutting down. Those are certainly different interpretations of historical events that I think are indicative of a society that has been in conflict for so long, and is a natural phenomenon likely to conflict. They don't necessarily reflect the kind of more extreme narratives that I discuss in my book. Dr. Beilin and Ambassador Mansour, are very intellectual and diplomatic individuals. So those aren't necessarily representative of the more kind of national narratives that I describe in my book and that continue to perpetuate the conflict. I think we're dealing with individuals here that are working towards peace, and that has been their work thus far.
Thank you very much, Grace, and thank you, all three of you, for your work towards peace in the Middle East and resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This does conclude panel 1 and the first day of our seminar. I'd like to ask you all to please tune in tomorrow, the 17th of November at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time for panel 2, which is about solutions journalism in the coverage of the Israeli Palestinian conflict. We look forward to another engaging and interesting discussion, and I think it might also touch on those narratives of coverage and how we talk about at the local level the situation in the Middle East. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And your meaningful interventions today. All the best to everyone. Thank you for tuning in, dear audience.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.